Before we go any further with working with different template files, I want to take a moment to talk about adding markup, because there is commonly a situation where as a WordPress developer, you're handed a mockup. So maybe you have the HTML and CSS done and you have to import that over into WordPress. Now, you may start at the beginning dumping it all into an index.php file and chopping it up. You may already have your header and footer files created, but you probably don't want to go too far along without taking the time to add the markup. So as I mentioned, I'm using a lot of the markup from Underscores, which is the WordPress kind of go-to starter theme. It's what they use for the main WordPress default themes, and we looked at it earlier, and I like to use that as a reference. Now, there are some times when you can't use that as a reference. You have to add your own markup. So you've got to be smart about adding it in, and I'm just going to show you the process here of what I'm going to do to port over the stuff from Underscores that we want inside of our theme. And then after this, you'll do the same, and then you'll do it with your own project. Now, in your own project, you may not be starting with your own HTML already designed, but you could take some extra time to add in your own markup, and that's what you'll be doing. So let's look at this process now. Okay, I'm going to just copy and paste this code, and you could grab it from the completed file as well. This first one dealing with viewport, so helping with the display on mobile devices, and then profile, which I hear people go back and forth on. This helps with some of the metadata that WordPress may be adding or plugins may be adding. Some people say you don't need it if you're designing a site from scratch. Some folks say, hey, just go ahead and throw it in there. So I'm going to err on the side of just go ahead and throw it in there, and that kind of wraps up what we need inside of our head here. Now, coming down into our main area, I do want to add some extra markup here. And the first thing I'm going to do is add in a new div with an ID of page. Again, I'm copying a lot of this over. A lot of this is going to help our CSS work, and it's just kind of copying some generic stuff. Okay, so we've got that set up. Another thing that is a nice thing to add, and you see this a lot in WordPress sites, and it helps with accessibility, is a link to help people skip to the main content. So if I do a tab inside of here, it's going to let me easily just add hashtag content. And I haven't created that div yet, but I will, and I'll assign that ID. So that's helpful right there. Let's add some classes to it. We're going to call this skip link. And again, I'm using some generic terms and screen reader text. So that's what Bootstrap is, or that's what Underscore's using. That's what I'll use here. And then down here, I'm going to do escape HTML-E, which is going to echo it out. And I'll say skip to content, and then tell it what my theme handle is so that translators can work with that too. So WP hierarchy, and that with a semicolon. There we go. So that will work once we get the rest of it working. Now, before we actually start the nav, I also want to throw in a header section. So I'm going to use the, oh, that's not what I wanted. I'm going to use the HTML5 header. There we go. And I'm going to give that an ID of masthead. Again, just following the conventions here, and throw this navigation again inside of there. Give some white spaces just so we've got good readability. I'm going to bump that down a bit. Okay, so now we've got a header area there. Sorry, one more class there. I'm going to call this site header, and the role is going to be set to banner. Again, that's just for some accessibility reasons there. So now we've got our nav, we've got our header area, and before we do that navigation, I want to display the title of my site. That makes sense, right? So I'm going to do a div with a class of site branding, and then down inside of here, we could leverage we could do two things. One is we could just hard code it in, so we could say something like P with a class of site title, and then we could say WP hierarchy, right? But we don't want to do that. We could do it now and come back and show you in the template tags later, but I'm just going to introduce a template tag now, even though that really is supposed to be the next section. But blog info is so helpful that we're really going to use it again and again in different places, or you're going to use it throughout your development, because it gives you generic information about WordPress itself. So we could grab the site name, the site description, all of that kind of stuff. So that's what we'll throw in there, and we could even throw in a link around this so that we know it's going to link to where we want to go, right? We could turn this into a link. So let's say ahref, and here I'm going to show you something new as well. What we're going to do here is a little bit, might be a little bit confusing, but it's going to make sense once I type it out here and explain it. So what we really want is this home URL function. And home URL will get us a link to our home, and this is how we're going to pass it. But in WordPress, for sanitary reasons, we're doing escape URL, just a good practice to pass that through. Again, something you would not know at this point. A lot of these conventions we're copying over, and that's one of the great things about a starter theme is you get the stuff where, as you might have just put /, there may be some benefits to writing it out this way, but that's going to give us a link to the home page of our site, whatever that is set to. So that's looking pretty good. For accessibility reasons, I could put relationship home just to hard code and let them know that this is indeed taking us home. And let's go ahead and we could even put in the site description if we want. So let's add a class of site description. And then it's going to be the same thing, that blog info. So I could just come up here, copy that, and paste it in and change name to description. And I think that that's enough for now. We've got our site title, we've got our site description inside of site branding. We come down, we've got our main navigation appearing here. We close out the header. We close out, what was this other div? We close out the page. We don't want to close out the page in our header. So this is a bit of a problem. This is going to have to go down into our footer. So let's come down into our footer, put that down, and then a good practice, is just to say footer. And that's going, we'll do it this way so you know it's an ID. That's going to close out our footer. So that will let anybody know what that is, and that's helpful. The other thing I want to do is I want to open up a new div. So the header closes, and then I'm going to, let's give ourselves a little bit more space. I'm going to do ID of content. So remember how we created this link up here that is going to, here we go, jump down to main content, skip to content. Well, boom, that's where it's going to drop us, right down to here, and we'll call this site content. And then again, that closing div that I just deleted, that needs to go here. And we'll copy this comment over and just say that this is the closing of the content. And this is helpful because you might not know exactly where you are, what's been opened in the header. So nice to know in the footer what you're closing out there. So now we've got some main content here looking good. Let's hop back into our theme and take a look. All right, check out this. This is looking mighty different. We've got a main area. This is looking a little bit cleaner. This will always link us back to the home. We've got the name of our site, and it should, if we come into our customizer, PHP for WordPress, a demo WordPress site, that should work. Update, cool. So that takes care of our main wrapper. So at this point, you should see what we did. That we added a bunch of stuff to our header and to our footer. So we took care of that, but there's still some markup that we could go into inside of the actual main content area. So let's look at that next.